What up, motherfuckers? It's your boy, the hater up in this bitch. And I was thinking about something this morning as I was walking my dog because I'm always thinking about how to explain things to casual viewers of wrestling or to casual people in life. You know, I'm all about the explanations here on the Hater channel, motherfucks. We're not here just to say this thing was good, this thing was bad. We're here to make some sense out of this clusterfuck that we find ourselves in. You know what I mean? Like some other great YouTubers. So here we go. I was thinking about the state of wrestling today in terms of how the card is booked versus how it was booked in the past, and in my opinion, how it should always be booked. So I'm talking about the diversity of a card, right? Now, a lot of people hear the word diversity and they're probably thinking, there aren't enough transgenders in WWE. WWE is historically transphobic and homophobic and racist. No, motherfucks, that ain't what I'm talking about. I'm talking about diversity in the sense that things are different and things have a purpose. And therefore, a hierarchy, right? When a show is booked, there are various elements that have to come together. And these elements are used then to signify what is and what is not important in the card. And if you dig a little bit deeper, you're able to figure out what it is that makes some of these segments, wrestlers, matches, whatever the case may be, better, more important, more prioritized than others, right? So let's take, for example, one of the dark eras of SmackDown when they had the I think it was the juniors division, the midget wrestlers, or whatever, the little people wrestlers. I really don't know the politically correct term. Maybe it's dwarf. I don't even know, motherfucks. You know? And they had these jabrones, these like midget wrestlers from like Mexico and whatever, right? They also had Hornswoggle, and they would have like a match here and there, and it was just like a comedy, fest, right? It wasn't like they're not good wrestlers because they're small, so they can't do a lot of the cool things, or they do them in a much more sloppy way. This makes perfect sense. Obviously, motherfucks, the wrestling ring and the wrestling medium is designed for not little people, right? So, for example, for a Hornswoggle to climb a turnbuckle, it takes a fucking eternity, right? Versus for RVD, it takes 1 second, right? You catch my drift. The same would be said if, sports of any sort were invented with, like, complete inclusivity in mind, right? So basketball, if it were to be inclusive of short people, not even little people, but short people, right? The baskets would be lower, But because of the way basketball is designed, it's designed to attract and therefore create stars that are large, that are big and tall, right? Football, you need to be strong in a lot of positions. You need to be limber in some positions, and you need to be, quick in some other ones, but you need to be strong overall, right? Like, most football players have to be strong because most of them, are going to be like in the O-line or the D-line, right? Most of them are not going to be quarterbacks, obviously, right? So, there you have it, right? The sport itself has a certain archetype. And I know a lot of people don't want to hear it, but the facts are what the facts are. Sports were invented so men could compete in them. Now, I'm not saying this in like a ha-ha way. I'm saying this in the sense that when people argue, when liberals, if you will, argue that sports are like inherently masculine and sports are like kind of inherently designed to marginalize women, they're obviously right. You know what I mean? Like, obviously women and men cannot compete on the same level in sports because sports have been designed, they've been created with the idea of comparing these qualities that men have over other men and also over women, right? So if a contest is developed to determine who is the strongest, like, it's a foregone conclusion during the Olympics back in ancient Greece that men are going to compete because obviously men are stronger than women. No woman can beat up Achilles, right? That would be the argument. So therefore men compete, right? But the thing that we're measuring, and the thing that we're placing value on is strength, right? If someone made a sport that measures like flexibility perhaps, maybe women would have a better chance, right? Like gymnastics, there's a lot more women in gymnastics it seems like. But the reason why I bring all this up, cucks, is quite simple, right? Just because the little people don't have what it takes to climb the turnbuckle like RVD does not mean they are useless, right? They, in fact, are very useful. WWE didn't handle them correctly, but they're very useful, right? So let's just ignore the juniors for a second. I just wanted to bring them up just to talk about the real kind of diversity that can be employed in wrestling, right? A mix of comedy, culture, because I think midget wrestling is like really big in Mexico, comedy, culture, and to a certain extent, motherfucks, wrestling as well. Like, you have people like El Torito who are interesting, right? Like, someone like El Torito, his wrestling style is accentuated by the fact that he's a little guy, right? if you were like, I don't know, the size of Ricochet, it would be like, oh, whatever, we already have Ricochet. But you see El Torito, it's even more fun if this little guy jumping around the ropes like he's like the king of the ropes. You know what I'm saying? So let's go with a typical card back in the day, in the Attitude Era, right? So you would start off on Sunday Night Heat, right? There'd be like a bunch of promos, just to hype up the event, kind of like a kickoff show. And you may have a match here and there, right? A lot of times it was a shitty match, but sometimes it was good, But a lot of times it'd be something like, I don't know, Big Boss Man versus Crash Holly, right? Not that either of those guys couldn't be on a pay-per-view, but a lot of times it'd be that kind of level of talent that would be on Sunday Night Heat. Or it might be like Gilbert or Jerry Lynn when he was around for like a couple of weeks, right? It's going to be that level of talent, right? Now, a lot of people look at people like Jerry Lynn and they see like a legendary wrestler, right? I don't, motherfucks. And here's why. He was placed on Sunday Night Heat, or if you were lucky, he was placed as the opening match or the second match or something, right? Now, the reason why he was placed there was because Jerry Lynn has a spot on the card. His spot is the guy that attracts people to buy the pay-per-view, right? His job is to go there and have like a very good match with Shannon Moore or something, right? So people are like, wow, this match is better than all the matches that I saw on Raw, right? Because it's treated with some respect, So maybe I'll tune into the pay-per-view, right? That plus the promos are supposed to draw you into the pay-per-view. But now let's ignore that match altogether because that match is, as we just said, a pre-show match. So let's look at the card, right? Let's look at the card. So first up, you might have some sort of like, I don't know, like opening match. Like back in the day, that was a thing, right? An opening match type match. So this might be something like either a tag match or perhaps some sort of like multi-man match type of thing, Obviously, this doesn't always hold true depending on the pay-per-view. But for example, let's look at Backlash 2000. That's the pay-per-view that I just Googled to look at. And I was right. The first match was Edge and Christian, who were the tag team champions, versus DX, which at this point was Road Dogg and X-Pac, motherfucks, because Billy Gunn was injured. This was an opening match. I remember this being a very good match. I remember how it ended, motherfucks. Basically, I think Christian hit X-Pac with like a title, and Edge rolled him up in like an O'Connor roll, right? But it was a good opening match. It showcased two good wrestlers, X-Pac and Road Dogg, two established wrestlers with two up-and-comers in Edge and Christian who would go on to be legends, right? Who were also the tag team champions. There was a storyline in the match. There was multiple storylines in this match. For example, Edge and Christian, this was their first title defense, I believe. And DX, they were having a little bit of a feud. Like X-Pac and Road Dogg were just entering this partnership, right? And the whole point was going to be like, which one's better, X-Pac or Road Dogg? So that was the beginning of that. Then, after the opening match is out of the way, right? The opening match is meant to hype the crowd up. It's like, oh, you're seeing something of value, something important with important wrestlers. In this case, it was 4 pretty important wrestlers, and it was for the tag team championships, right? Next, you're going to see the real bullshit match, the real undercard match. And in this pay-per-view, it was Dean Malenko and Scotty 2 Hotty for the light heavyweight title, right? I remember this match too. Dean Malenko wins with a top rope DDT. It was badass, right? And he retains his title, I think. In my memory, he beat Scotty 2 Hotty for the title. I know they exchanged it once, but in this case, he retains it. It looks like, based on Wikipedia. Now, with all that being said, it's like this match is just there, right, to kind of slow things down. It's a match on the card. But this does not mean that it's not important, motherfucks. Does not mean that it's not important. This is supposed to be, and by comparison, it was one of the longer matches, right? It was supposed to be a match that goes like over 10 minutes maybe, right? And it's supposed to be a wrestling match. It's supposed to showcase the medium of wrestling. It's a Dean Malenko match. It's there for people to look at and be like, wow, this guy can do a lot of moves, right? Oh, wow, this is a different thing than I'm used to seeing. Typically on Monday Night Raw, we don't see Dean Malenko unless he's getting squashed by like Kane or something, right? Because he has a specific spot, and this is his spot. His spot is to kind of almost put over Scotty 2 Hotty, even though he beats him, right? But have a title match, a solid, good match that I still remember. Next up, we have the Big Boss Man and Bull Buchanan versus the APA. This was a meaningless tag team match, and this pay-per-view had a lot of matches, so you needed one of these. But it was a showcase, It was a tag team match firmly within the tag team division. You have the Big Boss Man and Bull Buchanan, who are a tag team, versus the APA, who are, of course, a legendary tag team. Next up, we had, in almost every Attitude Era pay-per-view, you had the the match in the card that was meant to hold as many superstars as possible. But these matches were never meaningless. And in this pay-per-view, it was Crash Holly versus Matt and Jeff Hardy, Hardcore Holly, Perry Saturn and Taz, which was a six-pack hardcore match for the Hardcore Championship, right? The Hardcore Championship was a centerpiece. Compare how this is used versus how the 24/7 title is used. I rest my case, right? The whole story of this match, I remember perfectly, was Crash Holly somehow survived all of these men who are bigger and stronger than him, you know? So that happened. Then you have what in this case was a meaningless match, but it's a showcase match. You have the Big Show and Kurt Angle, and now we are entering into the mid-card territory, right? Everything that I've said thus far is an undercard match, except for the tag team title match, which is the opener, and is strategically placed there. But now, Big Show versus Kurt Angle, we are in the mid-card to main event. At this point, Big Show and Kurt Angle were still kind of mid-carders. I know that Big Show had main evented WrestleMania, but he wasn't presented as this big superstar, and neither was Kurt Angle. Kurt Angle was more like the IC champion, you know, he was like on that level, like a mid-carder. You could argue an upper mid-carder, but I would say mid-carder, right? So the mid-card starts, you know, Big Show and Kurt Angle, 2-minute squash match. You don't need to worry about it. Big Show beats his ass. Then, here's where the card gets good, motherfucks. Here's where the card gets good. Number one, you have TNA, Test and Albert versus the Dudley Boys. TNA beat the Dudley Boys. Now, a lot of people might think, but Hater, this seems like a throwaway tag match, like the Big Boss Man, Bull Buchanan versus APA match we mentioned earlier. Motherfucks. This was, in this pay-per-view, this was an upper mid-card match. I'll tell you why. There was a big storyline here. The storyline was Bubba Ray Dudley had a crush on Trish Stratus and wanted to powerbomb her through a table simultaneously. But he could not because of the crush. So, this match, the entire point of this match was that Trish Stratus was able to distract Bubba Ray one last time, allowing Test to hit the big boot on Devon, if I remember correctly, right? But then afterwards, Bubba Ray and Devon were able to put Trish through a table, breaking the spell that she had over Bubba Ray, and Bubba Ray reverting back to being Bubba Ray, right? This got, I remember perfectly, it got an insane pop, right? Because the storyline was built so well to the moment when Bubba Ray power bombs Trish through a table. Everyone wanted to see it, including me. Then we had a throwaway match, and this is a very interesting match. It was Eddie Guerrero versus S.A. Rios, right? And the only reason I believe for the European title, the only reason I believe this match was this late in the card was because the storyline was that Eddie Guerrero and China were going to prom. And it would make no sense if Eddie Guerrero and China came back from prom at like 8 p.m., right? But if they come later on in the night, it's like, all right, they went to prom for a little bit. It's a high school dance, right? So who gives a fuck? They came, Eddie Guerrero had like a fake tux. China had a dress on, right? And furthermore, it was the beginning of the end of their relationship. But more importantly, I mean, you can say this was kind of like the top of the relationship, but nevertheless, you saw where it was going, right? Eddie Guerrero was being developed as a character, and he was being put over. Also, it's for the European Championship, which is considered a very prestigious title. I know it doesn't seem like that anymore nowadays, but it was considered prestigious back in the day because a lot of times you'd have the European Champion be like Shawn Michaels, you know, and then he becomes like WWE Champion. Or you'd have the European Champion, have memorable moments or hold it for a long time, or whatever the case may be, right? It was almost on par with the IC title. Now, of course, it was on par with the IC title when people like Eddie Guerrero held it. When D'Lo Brown held it, nobody cared. But when D'Lo Brown held the IC title, nobody cared either. Speaking of the IC title, the next match was a firm upper mid-card match. Benoit, Jericho. This match is two guys that are being positioned as upper mid-carders, with Jericho being positioned as an upper mid-carder who will one day become champion, and Benoit being positioned as the new guy who is kick-ass. This was a long match, it was a good match, and it ended with DQ. I believe Jericho raised the title, and Benoit hit his head on it while doing a suicide dive, right? This was kind of like a placeholder in the sense that it was meant to further this feud, but it was an upper mid-card match, and it was treated as such. It had the proper build, it had Jericho, which means that there was a charismatic figure behind the match, and it was overall a good match. Then we had the main event. Look at this main event. The Rock versus Triple H for the WWF Champion. Triple H comes in with McMahon and Stephanie McMahon, like Mr. McMahon and Stephanie McMahon, and the special guest referee was supposed to be Stone. No, sorry, he was the enforcer, I think. This doesn't say in Wikipedia, but Stone Cold was supposed to come back and be in The Rock's corner. The entire match is one big setup. The whole thing is this: The Rock is getting his ass beat because Shane McMahon was the special guest referee, so he's not counting. He's doing this, he's doing that. People are interfering. The Rock has no chance. Eventually, Linda McMahon comes out, I believe. Or maybe she doesn't. But the glass shatters and Stone Cold comes out with a chair. Like not Pat Briscoe. What the fuck's his name? The old gay one that passed away. I forget his name. The first Intercontinental, Pat Patterson. There you go. Pat Patterson and Jerry Briscoe go out to fight The Rock. Stone Cold. Stone Cold beats their ass with a chair. Does the same to DX. Goes in, hits a few stunners. The Rock hits the most electrifying move in sports entertainment. Pins Triple H and becomes the new champion for a short period of time, but the new champion. Now that we went over everything in this card and we know that everything has a place, think about why the things are where they are. No doubt, there's no doubt, nobody can argue that Eddie Guerrero, Benoit, and Jericho are better in-ring wrestlers than at least The Rock. Triple H, he's pretty good, but they're better than The Rock and they're better than Stone Cold. Let's be honest, right? The Dudley Boys are, in my opinion, the best tag team. But TNA should not be in this program. They were not a very good tag team. It would have been better to put the APA here, right? Perhaps some of you see where I'm going with this. There are other reasons. Matt Hardy and Jeff Hardy, everybody knew their ceiling was higher than Crash Holly's. But Crash Holly wins the match, and he is the guy that the match is built around, right? Now, the reason why I bring all this up is because, as you can see, the structure of the card does not follow the same structure of today's cards. Today's cards, everything is the same, right? Here, you have the cruiserweight match, the light heavyweight match, right? Dean Malenko, Scotty 2 Hotty. It's early in the card, but it provides something else. It provides two small guys wrestling a good match, which some people might be interested in. Then we have Edge and Christian in the first match versus DX. This provides that tag team hankering. People that like tag team matches are going to be pleased with this match because it involves the tag team titles and because it involves two good tag teams, right? Then we have a few placeholders that are strategically placed in the beginning of the card. Big Boss Man and Bull Buchanan versus APA is not meant to be a star-studded match. Then we have Crash Holly, which was a very memorable moment. Crash Holly being put over as the toughest guy, basically, in WWE. As JR said, he said, there are six tough men in this match, but perhaps none tougher than Crash Holly. I remember this perfectly from the year 2000 when I watched this, because it was such an impactful line. I haven't even watched this since, motherfucks. This is like one of my favorite pay-per-views of all time. Then Big Show and Kurt Angle. This is almost a way to tell the story that Kurt Angle is not ready yet. Big Show will squash him, right? But to also show that it is reasonable to book Kurt Angle in a pay-per-view match of this caliber against someone like Big Show, right? It's a mid-card match firmly in the middle of the card. Then we have the storyline-driven matches. These are the matches that go into the upper card all the way to the main event. You have TNA versus Dudley Boys, which was probably one of the most story-driven matches on this card. Benoit and Jericho, the ongoing story of their feud, right? And it was a boring one in many ways because it was like, I'm better, you're better, I'm better, you're better. But it was supposed to be this masterpiece of a match. And it was pretty good, right? Eddie Guerrero and Rios, that's also for a title, and it has the goofy story of Eddie Guerrero. That's the comedy match, you might say, the comedy gimmick. Eddie Guerrero was afraid to do the frog splash, a bunch of other shit, right? Then you have the main event for all the marbles, right? Designed entirely around the charisma of The Rock and Stone Cold's impeding return. That's what it is. It has nothing to do with the match itself. Now you look at any kind of card. We could even look at the Royal Rumble, which is kind of like a weird one. But you can look at any modern card. None of these things are present. There aren't any matches that are based on storylines beyond I'm better than you and the other guy saying, no, I'm the better one. Lashley versus Lesnar is that storyline. Rollins versus Reigns is that storyline. Becky Lynch versus Doudrop is that storyline. Every storyline is that storyline. There is no diversity. Because even though you have women's matches, and this pay-per-view, for example, did not have a women's match, even though you have women's matches, and they're like 3 out of 7 matches nowadays, it doesn't matter because the women are not wrestling in any way different from the cruiserweights. Like seeing Becky Lynch versus Doudrop is no different than seeing Omos versus like, I don't know, Austin Theory, right? It would be the same exact match. They do the same exact things. Whereas here, different people in different elements of the card do different things, which is what makes the card work well and have synergy. For example, I remember being excited about many of these matches. Some of them I didn't really care about, like Big Boss Man and Bull Buchanan versus APA, but even that one at least had APA, which was a fan favorite. They were awesome. They got huge pops. But the idea that I'm trying to elucidate here is that every match had a purpose. Every match existed with a reason, right? You have on Monday Night Raw, right? Like Otis versus Riddle. Or who the fuck cares? You know what I'm saying? Nobody wants to see this. It's no different than Randy Orton versus Chad Gable. It's the same thing. You know? Like the match is going to play out the exact same way. It's just a continuation of it. I understand Raw is not a pay-per-view, obviously. But what I'm getting at here, motherfucks, is that matches have to have personality and matches have to have a reason, right? The same way I brought up the juniors, you could bring up many other diverse, archetypes in wrestling. So you have the women, right? The women, they're based traditionally off their sex appeal, right? Or you might have like a sexy woman versus like, I don't know, a beast like China, right? That also sells. But the idea is this. Women's wrestling is different than men's mid-card wrestling because women are supposed to be attractive in wrestling and men are supposed to be tough, right? So if you're someone who likes to see attractive things, you watch the women's match for that. And if you want to see tough things, you watch, Benoit versus Jericho for that, right? In today's wrestling, if you're someone that wants to watch sexy things, you don't watch anything because there's none of that going on. If you want to watch tough people fight, you have both the women's match and the men's match to look forward to. As a matter of fact, if you want to watch cruiserweights wrestle, you're also going to have to be watching two tough guys wrestle. If you want to watch the main event, it's just two tough guys wrestling. Or two tough girls wrestling, right? There is no diversity, right? Whereas if you looked at the Attitude Era, the cruiserweights are supposed to be two high flyers that honestly aren't quite as good as the main eventers. They're presented as significantly below. Then you have the women who are supposed to be sexy and attractive. And this was reflected in the wrestling and, unfortunately, in the match types as well. Then you had tag teams, which were not supposed to be four tough guys fighting, but it's supposed to be two people that work well together against two other people that work well together. Not like the Usos and the New Day. The Usos who do like 15 super kicks in a match. But that's probably the one where you'll see the most parallel. Then, with the addition of the juniors back in like 2006, whatever the fuck it was, in SmackDown, you also had the midget match, right? Which served a purpose. The idea was, hold on, take a break, motherfucks. You're about to see something you haven't seen before. And that's how it was presented. It was presented as something exclusive to SmackDown. Oh, you only watch Raw? Well, they don't have the juniors. So here you are, motherfucks. You see what I'm saying? There was a point to it. Then you have the undercard and the midcard, which a lot of times is interchangeable. Al Snow versus Perry Saturn in the undercard is not really much more different than, I don't know, let's see two midcard types. Kurt Angle versus, I don't know, Benoit, let's say, right? Like, the matches are, of course, they're going to play out differently. Nobody knows. Everybody knows that they're going to play out differently, but the fact still remains, motherfuckers, they are a different match, right? But they're also comparable. I'm not going to sit here and pretend. Then you have the main event, and the main event speaks for itself. It has nothing to do with wrestling, right? It has everything to do with personality, story, and charisma. Today, a lot of main events have to do only with wrestling, right? Because there are people like Seth Rollins, who, in my opinion, is doing the best work of his career, but nevertheless, he's not charismatic. He isn't, motherfucks. He isn't. He's more charismatic than, I don't know, fucking Aleister Black, obviously, right? But he's not charismatic. So think about it this way, right? If there is no charisma, people are forced to watch wrestling. But you've just watched 8 other matches. The whole point of the main event is supposed to be like, now we're going to go to the story part of wrestling, right? You watch the wrestling part when Dean Malenko and Scotty 2 Hotty wrestled. Now you're going to watch the real medium of wrestling. The real meaty parts of wrestling, which involve good storytelling, right? No one ever gave a flying fuck that Dean Malenko and Perry Saturn were better in the ring than The Rock. Everybody acknowledged that The Rock was the better wrestler and therefore was booked as the champion. Nobody said, Dean Malenko can do more holds than The Rock. Why isn't he champion? Because the answer was self-evident. Dean Malenko will never sell a ticket. The Rock will sell millions and millions of tickets, motherfucks. And that's the point I'm trying to make. Nowadays, people have no charisma. And the facts are what the facts are. You can always compensate for a lack of wrestling ability with larger-than-life personalities like The Rock. Nobody ever even realized The Rock was a bad wrestler. But you cannot compensate personality, right, with good wrestling, quote-unquote, because it's fake. That's why Dean Malenko never became a star, motherfucks. That's why. Take care of yourselves.